Some nights, the city didn't feel like a place of dreams. It felt like a cage made of glass and steel, and Zara was just one of the countless souls rattling against the bars. The restaurant Viridian was the most beautiful part of that cage. A jewel box of hushed conversations, clinking crystal, and the scent of money so old it was practically odorless. From her station by the service bar, Zara watched the performance. She was part of the scenery, a ghost in a crisp white shirt, black skirt, and a crimson apron that felt like a brand. 23 years old, and her life was a repeating loop of polished silverware and feigned smiles. She moved between tables with a practiced grace that disguised the bone-deep weariness, her mind a million miles away, sketching designs for a life she couldn't afford to build. Every patron was a character in a play she wasn't invited to read. They were architects of the skyline she could only stare at, their laughter echoing in a key she didn't understand. She saw them, but they never saw her. She was a function, a pair of hands delivering a plate of seared scallops. Tonight, the air was different, thicker. A low hum of electricity that had nothing to do with the dim, artfully arranged chandeliers. It arrived with him. He entered not with a bang, but with a sudden, chilling silence that fell over the immediate area like a velvet shroud. His name, she would learn later, was Min Jun. He was around 35, dressed in a suit so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. His face was a study in sharp angles and severe control, his eyes holding a stillness that was more unnerving than any overt threat. Two other men, shadows in his wake, flanked him. One was broad and watchful, the other leaner, with a nervous energy that he tried to hide behind a practiced smile. They took the corner booth, the one with a panoramic view of the glittering, indifferent city. It was Zara's section. She took a breath, smoothed her red apron, and walked toward the eye of the storm. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the restaurant's quiet symphony of strings. She approached the table, her training kicking in like muscle memory. "Good evening. May I start you with something to drink?" Her voice was steady, a small miracle. Min Jun didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at her, not really. His gaze was distant, fixed on the sprawling cityscape beyond the floor-to-ceiling window. It was the lean one, Hyun, who answered, his smile a little too wide. "3 whiskeys. Your best," the broad one. Deacon just nodded, his eyes methodically scanning the room, cataloging exits, faces, threats. Zara retreated, her skin prickling. There was a power at that table that felt primal, dangerous. It was the power of men who didn't ask for things, but took them. She returned with the drinks, placing them on the dark wood with hands she prayed were steady. As she set down the last glass in front of Min Jun, his eyes finally lifted to meet hers. For a split second, the mask of indifference slipped. She saw a flicker of something ancient and weary in their depths, a loneliness that resonated with her own. Then it was gone, replaced by the same unnerving calm. She was about to ask for their order when she saw it. A tiny, dancing point of crimson light. It appeared on the crisp white tablecloth first, a frantic little insect. Then it climbed, crawling up the lapel of Min Jun's immaculate suit. It settled directly over his heart. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing. The distant chatter of the restaurant faded to a dull roar. The clink of a fork hitting a plate sounded like a gunshot. Zara's mind screamed. It was a laser, a sight, from one of the 1,000 darkened windows across the street. Her life, her dreams of fashion school, her tiny apartment, her exhaustion, it all evaporated. There was only that single, malevolent red dot. She didn't think. There was no room for thought, only a surge of pure, unadulterated instinct. While Deacon scanned the room and Hyun smiled his empty smile, Zara saw the real threat. In the space of a single heartbeat, she moved. "Get down." The words were a strangled cry as she lunged, not away, but forward. She threw her entire body against Min Jun, her shoulder crashing into his chest. The force of the impact sent them both tumbling sideways off the plush booth seat. The world exploded. A deafening crack, followed by the crystalline shatter of the massive window. Glass rained down like diamonds, and the night air rushed in, cold and sharp. Screams erupted around them. Chaos bloomed. On the floor, tangled with a man who dealt in death, Zara's cheek was pressed against the fine wool of his suit. All she could smell was expensive cologne and the metallic tang of imminent violence. The immediate aftermath was a blur of motion and sound. Deacon was already on his feet, a weapon appearing in his hand as if from thin air, his body a shield between the shattered window and the floor. Hyun was shouting into a phone, his voice sharp and laced with panic. Patrons were screaming, scrambling under tables, a wave of terror washing through the curated elegance of Viridian. Zara, however, was trapped in a bubble of surreal quiet. Her ears rang. Minjun's weight was heavy on top of her, his arm protectively, reflexively, thrown across her back. She could feel the solid, tense muscle of his body, the surprisingly steady beat of his heart against her own frantic pulse, the heart that was still beating because of her. He shifted, rolling off her with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He didn't look at the chaos, at his men, at the gaping hole in the window. He looked directly at her. His eyes, dark and piercing, held no gratitude, only a cold, calculating intensity that stripped her bare.
Who are you?
His voice was low, a gravelly whisper that cut through the noise. Before she could answer, Deacon was there, hauling her to her feet with a grip of iron. We have to move. Now, they weren't heading for the main exit. Deacon propelled her toward the kitchen, a whirlwind of panicked chefs and flying pans parting before them like the sea. The heat, the smells of garlic and searing meat, were a shocking contrast to the cold terror of the dining room. Minjun followed close behind, his hand resting on the small of her back, not as a comfort, but as a brand of ownership. He was guiding her, controlling her, ensuring his asset, or his problem, didn't get away. They burst through the rear exit into a grimy alley that stank of grease and old rain. A black sedan, sleek and menacing, screeched to a halt beside them. Hyun was already holding the back door open. Get in, Deacon grunted, pushing Zara inside. She stumbled onto the supple leather seats. Minjun slid in beside her, the door slamming shut with a heavy, final thud. The car peeled out, tires screaming on the wet asphalt, throwing her against him. The world outside became a smear of neon and darkness. She was trapped, a prisoner in a steel box with a man whose life she had just saved, and who now looked at her as if she were a puzzle he was about to solve by taking it apart, piece by piece. Talk, Minjun commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Why did you do it?
Who sent you?
Zara stared at him, her terror finally giving way to a spark of defiance. Her uniform was disheveled, her apron askew, a small cut from the flying glass bleeding on her cheek. Sent me? Nobody sent me, she snapped, her voice trembling but firm. I'm a waitress. Or I was. I saw a red light on your chest. I've seen enough movies to know what that means. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of disbelief, perhaps even grudging respect. He studied her, from her wide, frightened eyes to her clenched fists. He was assessing her, weighing her. Deacon, in the front seat, spoke without turning around. Sir, she's clean.
No white, no weapon.
Her employee file says she's a student at the community college. Name's Zara Bell. Minjun's gaze remained locked on her. The information seemed to confirm something for him, but it didn't solve his problem. You saw a light and you pushed me, he stated, less a question than a confirmation of an absurdity. You didn't run. You didn't scream. You moved toward the bullet. I didn't have time to think, she whispered, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a cold dread in its place. I just moved. He leaned back against the seat, the tension in his shoulders easing almost imperceptibly. He knew she was telling the truth. A professional would never have been so clumsy, so reckless. A professional wouldn't have that look of pure, unadulterated shock on her face. But her truth was the most dangerous thing of all. She was a civilian who had seen his face, who was now entangled in his war. She was a witness, a loose end. You understand, he said, his voice soft but heavy with implication, that you cannot go home. You cannot go back to your life. Not now. Zara's blood ran cold. The finality in his tone was absolute. What are you talking about? You can just drop me off. I won't say anything. I swear. A humorless smile touched his lips. It's not about what you'll say.
It's about what you saw.
They know a civilian saved me.
They will assume you're with me.
To them, you are no longer a waitress. You are a target. He turned his head, looking out at the city lights blurring past. Your old life is over. Your new one just began. The black sedan moved through the city's glittering veins like a phantom, silent and unseen. They bypassed the sprawling suburbs and ascended, climbing the winding roads of the wealthiest hills until the urban sprawl was just a carpet of distant lights below. Zara felt like she was ascending to another planet. The car slipped into a private underground garage, the gate closing behind them with a heavy, sealing boom. This wasn't a hideout, it was a fortress. They rode a silent, private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse apartment. The sheer scale of it stole her breath. It was less a home and more a monument to minimalist wealth and paranoia. One entire wall was a sheet of glass, offering the same stunning view as the restaurant, but from a higher, more dominant perspective. The furniture was sparse and severe. Black leather, chrome, dark wood. There was no clutter, no personal touches, no sign that anyone actually lived here. It was as cold and controlled as the man who owned it. Minjun walked to the window, his back to her, a silhouette against the city. He seemed to command. "Deacon," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Get her cleaned up. Find her something to wear." Deacon nodded, his expression unreadable. He gestured for Zara to follow him down a long, white hallway. Every footstep seemed to echo her own fear. He led her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed with crisp, white linens. An ensuite bathroom of marble and glass. A walk-in closet that was currently empty. "There's a first aid kit in the bathroom for that cut," Deacon said, his tone professional, almost detached. "I'll have clothes for you in a moment." He paused at the door. "Try to get some rest. No one can get to you here." The words were meant to be reassuring, but they only reinforced the reality of her gilded cage. She was a prisoner. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress impossibly soft. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of a wall-mounted television. A frightened girl in a stained work uniform, a world away from her own life. The adrenaline had worn off completely, replaced by a hollow, shaking exhaustion. Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back began to fall, silent tracks on her dusty cheeks. She had saved a man's life, and in doing so, had utterly destroyed her own. A short while later, Deacon returned with a simple gray sweatsuit and a fresh towel. He left them on the bed without a word. The silent efficiency of it all was unnerving. After a long, hot shower where she scrubbed at her skin as if she could wash the night away, she changed into the soft, anonymous clothes. When she emerged, feeling marginally more human, she found Minjun waiting in the main living area. He was holding a glass of whiskey, the same kind she had served him what felt like a lifetime ago. He gestured to the couch opposite him. It was an invitation that felt like a command. She sat, perching on the edge of the leather cushion. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her face. "You're a student," he said. "Fashion design, it wasn't a question." Deacon had clearly been thorough. "I was," she corrected, her voice small. "I don't think I'll be making it to my midterms." A flicker of something, regret, maybe, crossed his face. "I am not a man who apologizes," he began, his voice low and resonant. "But the position you find yourself in is regrettable. It was not my intention to involve an innocent." "You didn't," she countered, a surprising sliver of her old fire returning. "I did." "I guess that's the problem." "It is," he agreed, his gaze intense. "My enemies, the ones who sent that sniper, are from the Vasilyev syndicate. They are Russian. They are not subtle. They will not stop until I am dead. Now that you have been seen with me, saving me, they will assume you are a key part of my organization. They will hunt you to get to me. The name Vasilyev meant nothing to her, but the cold certainty in Minjun's voice sent a fresh wave of fear through her. So, what happens to me? Do you just keep me locked up in this museum forever? He almost smiled. This is not a prison, Zara.
It is a sanctuary.
For now, you will stay here. You will be safe. And I will eliminate the threat. And then, she pressed. Then I will give you back your life. But as he said the words, they both knew it was a lie. There was no going back. The girl who served drinks and dreamed of dress designs was gone, lost somewhere in the sound of shattering glass. A new version of her was being forged in this cold, beautiful penthouse, and neither of them knew who she would become. Days bled into a surreal routine. Zara existed in the suspended animation of the penthouse, a ghost in a palace. The view from the window became her world. She watched the sun rise and set over a city she could no longer touch, a silent observer of a life that was no longer hers. Deacon was her primary point of contact. He was a man of few words but quiet consideration, ensuring she had food, books, anything she requested within the confines of her gilded cage. He treated her with a professional respect that bordered on kindness, a stark contrast to Hyun's unsettling demeanor. Hyun, when he visited, was all false smiles and solicitous questions. Are you comfortable? Do they treat you well? He'd ask, his eyes lingering a moment too long. His concern felt predatory, a spider checking on the fly in its web. Zara found herself instinctively recoiling from him, offering clipped, polite answers. Minjun remained a distant, powerful presence. He was often gone for long stretches, returning in the dead of night, the scent of the cold city air clinging to his clothes. When he was there, the atmosphere in the penthouse crackled with a tense energy. He would sit for hours in the dark, staring at the city lights, the weight of his world pressing down on him. Zara found herself watching him, her fear slowly being supplanted by a dangerous curiosity. She saw the exhaustion behind his control, the isolation in his power. During one long, quiet afternoon, Deacon was reviewing security footage and street camera feeds in the main living area. Minjun stood by the window, a statue of frustration. They were looking for the sniper's nest, for any clue that could lead them to the source of the attack. They were professionals, Deacon said, his voice flat.
No trace.
They would have been in and out in 90 seconds, Minjun's jaw tightened. They knew my schedule. They knew which table I would take, his eyes narrowed. The leak is internal, the word hung in the air, cold and sharp. An invisible poison was spreading through his organization. Zara, who had been sketching idly in a notebook Deacon had given her, paused. She remembered that moment, the red dancing on the tablecloth. She remembered looking up past Minjun through the window. The reflection, she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. Both men turned to look at her.
What?
Minjun asked, his attention fully on her now. She stood and walked towards the window, her heart starting to beat faster. When I saw the laser, I looked up. Out the window. I didn't see the sniper, but I saw the reflection of your restaurant sign in the building across the street. She pointed towards a specific skyscraper, a dark monolith of glass and steel. The sign is red neon, but the reflection I saw was broken, distorted. It was reflecting off a window that was angled differently from the others. An open window, Deacon was already at the computer, pulling up architectural plans of the building she indicated. He zoomed in on the side facing the restaurant. Most of the windows were uniform, sealed panes of glass. But on the 27th floor, an executive suite, there was a single section of operable windows, designed to tilt open for ventilation. Floor 27, Deacon said, a new edge to his voice. Leased to a shell corporation. Untraceable, Minjun stared at Zara, a new light in his eyes. The dismissive assessment was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused intrigue. She wasn't just a civilian he had to protect. She had given them their first real lead. She had seen something his own trained security had missed. How did you notice that? He asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. I don't know, she admitted. I used to clean those windows at the restaurant after closing. You notice things. Smudges, reflections, how the light hits. It was just wrong. For the first time, The immense power imbalance between them shifted, just a fraction. She had provided something of value. She wasn't just a piece on the board, she had influenced the game. A small, almost imperceptible nod from Minjun was her only thanks, but it felt like a seismic event. He now saw her not as a liability, but as an unexpected and perhaps essential asset. The hunt had a direction, and she was the one who had pointed the way. The lead, however, only tightened the knot of paranoia. The 27th floor suite had been wiped clean, a ghost location. The knowledge that the leak was internal poisoned every interaction, every conversation. Minjun's command became a fortress of suspicion, and the penthouse its isolated keep. Zara could feel the tension ratcheting up, a high-strung wire humming through the walls. Minjun grew more remote, the mask of control firmly back in place, but now she could see the cracks. She saw it in the way he clenched his jaw when he was on the phone, the way his eyes were constantly scanning, even within the supposed safety of his home. One evening, as Zara was heading to her room, she overheard Hyun speaking to Minjun in the main living area, his voice low and urgent. "This is a mistake, keeping her here. She's a civilian. A weakness. Let me arrange for her to disappear. A new life. Far away. It's the only way to be sure she stays." Minjun's reply was like chipping ice. "The threat isn't her. It's one of us." The conversation ended abruptly as Zara retreated back down the hall, her blood cold. Hyun's words, meant to sound like pragmatic advice, felt like a threat wrapped in a lie. He wanted her gone. The thought chilled her more than any external enemy. She was safer with the cold, distant mob boss than with his smiling, solicitous second-in-command. The next attack was more brazen, more personal. Minjun was leaving the building for a meeting only 3 people knew the details of. Him, Deacon, and Hyun. As his car prepared to exit the underground garage, Deacon, running a last-minute remote diagnostic from the penthouse, saw an anomaly. A pressure sensor on the vehicle's undercarriage that wasn't standard. "Stop." Deacon's voice boomed through the car's internal comms. "There's a bomb." The lockdown was instant. The garage was sealed. The bomb squad, Minjun's own private, efficient team, was called. They disarmed a sophisticated explosive device, powerful enough to destroy the car and half the garage. It had been planted by someone with access. Someone on the inside. That night, the penthouse was silent as a tomb. The city lights outside seemed to mock their confinement. Zara found Minjun on the balcony, a place he rarely used. He stood without a coat in the biting wind, staring down at the city. He didn't seem to notice the cold. She hesitated, then grabbed a thick cashmere blanket from the sofa and walked out to join him. She didn't say a word, just draped the blanket over his shoulders. He flinched at her touch, a brief, surprised reaction, before relaxing into it. "He tried to kill me in my own home," Minjun said, his voice raw with a quiet fury. It was the first time she had heard him sound anything other than controlled. "Someone I trusted. I heard Hyun," she confessed, her voice barely audible over the wind. "He wanted you to get rid of me." Minjun turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "He's been my right hand for 10 years. The betrayal was a palpable wound." "Deacon is setting a trap," Minjun continued, his gaze locking with hers. "We're feeding information about a shipment, a major one. Only 2 routes. I will tell Hyun I am taking the north route. I will tell the others I am taking the south. Deacon will monitor both." He was trusting her with this, she realized. The knowledge was a heavy weight. "What if you're wrong?" she asked. "What if it's someone else?" "I am rarely wrong about people," he said, a hint of his old arrogance returning, but it was tinged with the pain of his current doubt. "But I have been before." The trap was sprung the next day. Hyun arrived at the penthouse, his face a mask of grim concern. "The Vasilyev crew knows about the south route. They're setting up an ambush. We have to divert you north now." The lie was seamless, delivered with the practiced ease of a born traitor. Minjun's face remained impassive. "Thank you, Hyun. Your loyalty is appreciated." Behind him, Deacon stepped out from the hallway, his face grim. 2 large, silent men followed him. Hyun's smile faltered. He saw the look on Minjun's face, the cold, dead certainty. He saw Deacon's stony expression. The trap hadn't been on the streets. It was right here in this room. I told no one about the south route, Hyun, Minjun said, his voice dangerously quiet. Except you. Hyun's facade shattered. The panic was immediate, his eyes darting towards the exits. He took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. Minjun, you have to understand. Vasilyev, he is my family. I knew your family, Hyun, Minjun retorted, stepping forward. I paid for your mother's surgery. I sent your sister to university. They were my family too. The words were like hammer blows. The betrayal wasn't just business. It was a deep, personal desecration. Hyun reached for a weapon tucked into the back of his waistband, but he never had a chance. Deacon and his men moved with brutal efficiency, subduing him in seconds. As they dragged the struggling, pleading Hyun away, Minjun stood perfectly still, his back to Zara. She could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the tremor of rage and hurt he was trying to suppress. He was a king who had just discovered the deepest treason in his court, and in that moment, he looked utterly, terrifyingly alone. The discovery of Hyun's betrayal sent shockwaves through the organization, but there was no time for grief or recrimination. It was a wound that left them exposed. Vasilyev, his inside man now captured, would not wait. He would see this as a moment of weakness, a chance to strike a final, decisive blow. The penthouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a command bunker on the eve of a losing battle. Minjun, Deacon, and Zara became an unlikely triumvirate, poring over maps, schedules, and personnel files spread across the large glass dining table. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the low hum of encrypted electronics. Minjun was a man possessed, driven by a cold, focused rage. The pain of the betrayal had been transmuted into a lethal clarity. He was anticipating Vasilyev's moves, countering them in his mind, but he was on the defensive. He'll hit the warehouses at the port, Deacon said, pointing to a location on a digital map. He thinks our main shipment is coming in tonight. Hyun gave him the date. It's a decoy, Minjun stated. But the men guarding it are real. He'll slaughter them to make a point. He ran a hand over his face, the exhaustion evident. He wants to bleed me out, dismantle my operations piece by piece before coming for the head. They were caught in a reactive loop, always one step behind the information Hyun had already given away. Zara, who had been silently listening, tracing the logistical lines on the map with her finger, spoke up. Her voice was quiet but clear, cutting through the tense silence. You keep thinking about what he knows. You should be thinking about what he thinks he knows about you. Both men looked at her. He thinks you're predictable, she continued, gaining confidence. Hyunlove told him that you're methodical, that you value strength and direct confrontation. He'll expect you to fortify your strongholds. He'll expect a battle of attrition. She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. But Hyun never saw you as a person. He saw you as a boss. He doesn't know what you're like when you're cornered. He sold Vasilyev a caricature of you. She turned back to face them. Vasilyev is expecting a king to defend his castle. He won't be expecting the king to leave the castle, walk across the board, and take him out personally. A dangerous silence filled the room. Deacon looked from Zara to Minjun, his expression cautious. It was a reckless, high-risk idea. A direct strike is suicide, Deacon said flatly. We don't know where he'll be. No, Zara countered, her mind working fast, connecting dots no one else saw. You don't have to find him. You just have to make him come to you. Not to your territory, not to a warehouse. To neutral ground. Somewhere he feels safe. She looked directly at Minjun. Hyun betrayed you. Vasilyev knows this. He'll be expecting you to be emotional, angry, maybe even desperate. He'll be arrogant. Use it. Propose a truce. Vasilyev will never agree to a truce, Deacon scoffed. He will if the offer is delivered by Hyun, Minjun said, his eyes gleaming with a new, predatory light. He understood immediately. He saw the shape of Zara's logic. It was a strategy born not of criminal tactics, but of human psychology. It was brilliant. We make Hyun believe his family is threatened by us, Minjun elaborated, his voice low and intense. We force him to contact Vasilyev, to set up a meeting to finalize the betrayal, a face-to-face handover of my remaining assets. Vasilyev won't be able to resist the satisfaction of seeing me formally broken, delivered by my own right hand. He'll bring his entire force, Deacon warned. We'll be outnumbered. He'll bring the force he thinks he needs to eliminate a broken man, Minjun corrected. We won't be there as a broken man. We will be there as the trap. The power dynamic in the room had completed its reversal. Zara was no longer a protected civilian. She was a strategist, the architect of their only hope. Minjun looked at her, his expression a complex mixture of awe and something deeper, something intensely personal. You should have been a general, he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a rare, genuine smile. There's still time, she replied, the faintest hint of a smile on her own lips. In the quiet before the coming storm, a new alliance was forged, not of necessity, but of mutual respect and a dangerous, unspoken attraction. They were no longer a boss and his ward. They were partners. The location was a defunct industrial park on the city's forgotten fringe, a graveyard of brick and rusted steel. The abandoned cannery at its heart was chosen as the meeting point. It was neutral territory, belonging to no one, a place where deals were meant to be made and broken with equal ease. To Vasilyev, it was the perfect stage for his final triumph. To Minjun, it was a kill box. The plan, born from Zara's insight, was a symphony of strategic deception. For 2 days, Deacon's teams moved in the shadows, not fortifying the cannery, but seeding it with traps. They didn't rig the main floor with explosives. That was too predictable. Instead, they weakened structural supports, set up remote-controlled industrial machinery, and established overlapping fields of fire from the surrounding derelict buildings. Zara's role was critical. She wouldn't carry a gun, but she would be their eyes. From a high vantage point in an old clock tower 200 yards away, equipped with thermal imaging binoculars and a direct line to Deacon, she was the nerve center. She could see all the approaches, all the blind spots. She was the one who would give the signal. Minjun would be the bait. He would walk in with only 2 guards, the very picture of a defeated man coming to terms. The night of the meeting was cold and moonless. A damp chill clung to the air, smelling of rust and decay. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched through the binoculars. Her hands were cold, but her mind was sharp, focused. She saw the convoy arrive. Not a subtle approach. 3 black SUVs, headlights cutting through the gloom. Vasilyev was arrogant. "They're here," she whispered into her mouthpiece. 3 vehicles. "I count 12 men deploying, plus Vasilyev and Hyun getting out of the center car. Copy that," Deacon's voice crackled back in her ear. "The boss is in position." Through the lenses, she saw Minjun walk out from the cannery's massive, groaning doors. He looked exactly as they'd planned, suit slightly disheveled, posture slumped in defeat. It was a masterful performance. Vasilyev, a large, bearded man radiating brutal confidence, strode toward him, Hyun trailing in his wake, like a beaten dog. They met in the center of the yard. The distance was too great to hear words, but the body language was everything. Vasilyev was gloating, expansive. Minjun was still, absorbing the humiliation. Zara scanned the perimeter. Vasilyev's men were fanning out, taking tactical positions, but they were sloppy, confident. Their formation was exactly what Deacon had predicted. They were surrounding the cannery, not the entire park. "They're in position," Zara said, her voice steady. "All targets are inside the designated zone. Hold for the signal," Deacon replied. The signal was Zara's call.
Minjun Hell insisted.
She had to make the judgment. She watched as Vasilyev clapped Minjun on the shoulder, a gesture of dominance. She saw Hyun refuse to meet Minjun's eyes. This was it. The moment of maximum arrogance. The moment they believed they had won.
"Now," she said.
The world erupted. It wasn't a single explosion, but a chain reaction. The first trap was sound. Massive speakers hidden in the cannery blasted a deafening, disorienting frequency, causing Vasilyev's men to flinch, to cover their ears. In that split second of confusion, the lights Deacon's team had set up on the surrounding rooftops flickered on, illuminating the yard in a blinding glare and plunging the perimeter into deeper shadow. Minjun was already moving. He drove an elbow into the throat of the guard beside him as his other guard engaged the second. It was controlled, brutal, and over in an instant. Vasilyev, momentarily stunned, drew his weapon, but he was too slow. Minjun was on him, not with a gun, but with a fury that was terrifying to behold. Through her binoculars, Zara watched the chaos unfold exactly as planned. Deacon's teams, hidden in the darkness, opened fire, their shots precise, targeting Vasilyev's scattered and disoriented men. It wasn't a firefight, it was a harvest. But Zara's focus was on the two central figures. Minjun disarmed Vasilyev, their fight devolving into a raw, physical struggle. But his real target was Hyun. As Vasilyev reeled back, Minjun turned his attention to his former right hand. He didn't raise a weapon. He simply walked toward him. Hyun, his face a mask of terror, fumbled for his own gun. He raised it, his hands shaking. Zara's breath caught in her throat. Through the powerful lenses, she saw the unspeakable pain and rage in Minjun's eyes. He didn't even try to dodge. He just kept walking forward, forcing Hyun to confront the full weight of his betrayal. The shot never came. Hyun's hands trembled, his resolve crumbling under the sheer force of Minjun's cold, disappointed gaze. The gun clattered to the asphalt. It was a confession of failure, of a spirit so broken it couldn't even commit the final, damning act. Minjun stopped just before him, the space between them charged with years of shared history now curdled into poison. The ensuing fight was short and merciless. It wasn't a battle between equals, it was a judgment. Minjun moved with a devastating economy of motion, each strike a punishment for a specific memory, a specific trust violated. He systematically dismantled Hyun, not just physically, but emotionally, breaking him down until he was a crumpled heap on the ground, sobbing. Around them, the last of the gunfire echoed and died. Deacon's voice came through Zara's earpiece, calm and final. Perimeter secure. Vasilyev is in custody. All hostiles neutralized. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise had been. The blinding lights cut out, returning the yard to the murky gloom, now lit only by the distant city glow and the headlights of the SUVs. Zara kept her binoculars trained on the scene, her knuckles white. She watched as Deacon and two of his men approached Minjun, who stood over the fallen Hyun, his chest heaving. He was wounded. A long gash on his forearm was bleeding freely, but he seemed oblivious to it. He turned away from Hyun without a backward glance, akin casting out his most favored courtier for the last time. His eyes scanned the darkness, searching. He looked up, directly at the clock tower. Even from 200 yards away, Zara felt the intensity of his gaze, as if he could see her through the stone and glass. He was looking for her. He needed to know she was safe. She lowered the binoculars, her own breath catching in her throat. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a profound, shaking exhaustion in its wake. She had orchestrated this. She had given the order that had unleashed this controlled, lethal storm. The waitress who was afraid of her own shadow was gone forever. A part of her mourned that loss, while another part felt a terrifying, exhilarating sense of power. Deacon helped Minjun toward one of their own vehicles, which had pulled silently out of a hidden alley. Before he got in, Minjun stopped and spoke to one of Deacon's men, gesturing toward the clock tower. A few minutes later, a different man from their team arrived at the base of her perch. "Ma'am," he said, his voice respectful. "The boss sent me to escort you back, ma'am. Not the girl, not the civilian, ma'am." The shift was complete. She was no longer a package to be protected. She was part of the command structure. As she descended the dusty stairs of the tower on trembling legs, she saw the cleanup already in progress. It was a quiet, efficient, and chilling operation. Bodies were being removed, vehicles driven away. Within an hour, it would be as if nothing had ever happened here. As if the rust and decay had simply swallowed the violence whole. Back in the penthouse, the silence was different. It wasn't tense anymore. It was the calm of a storm that has passed, leaving devastation but also clear skies in its wake. Minjun was sitting on the sofa, his shirt off while a medic stitched the gash on his arm. Zara walked in, and the medic, sensing a shift in the air, quickly finished his work and departed. They were alone. Minjun stood up, the white bandages a stark contrast against his skin. He walked toward her, his expression stripped of all its masks. There was no boss, no king, only a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side. He stopped in front of her, his eyes tracing the lines of her face. "It's over," he said, his voice low. "You're safe," she met his gaze, unafraid. "Are you?" she asked. The question hung between them, referring to more than just physical threats. He reached out, his hand gently touching the healing cut on her cheek, the one she'd gotten in the restaurant what felt like 100 years ago. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. It wasn't the touch of a captor, but of a partner. In that single, silent gesture, everything that had remained unspoken between them was finally confessed. They had saved each other, and in the process, had become inextricably bound together. Weeks turned into a quiet month. The city outside the penthouse window carried on, oblivious to the secret war that had been fought in its shadows. The name Vasiliev vanished from the news, and the internal structures of Minjun's world were rebuilt, stronger and more streamlined than before. The betrayal had been a brutal lesson, but one that had cauterized the organization's weaknesses. For Zara, the silence was a time of reckoning. The penthouse was no longer a cage, but a crossroads. The door was unlocked. She was free to go. The threat had been neutralized, and Minjun had kept his word. Deacon had quietly presented her with a portfolio containing a new identity, a passport, and a bank account with enough money to start any life she wanted, anywhere in the world. Paris, London, Milan. The fashion schools she had once only dreamed of were now within her grasp. The life she had lost had been returned to her, upgraded and gift-wrapped. Yet, she hadn't left. She spent her days sketching, not just dress designs, but faces, moments, the hard lines of the city's skyline. Her art had changed. It was bolder, darker, more complex. She was no longer designing escapes. She was documenting a new reality. She found herself drawn to the window, watching the city not with longing, but with a sense of understanding. She had seen the machinery beneath the facade, the brutal architecture of power that held it all up. One evening, she was standing there, watching the lights of Viridian glitter in the distance, a tiny jewel in the vast darkness. It looked like a memory from someone else's life. Minjun came to stand beside her, the way he often did now. The tense silences of their early days had been replaced by a comfortable quiet, an understanding that needed no words. He didn't carry the same weight anymore. The constant, coiled tension in his shoulders was gone. The crown of his lonely kingdom sat a little lighter. "You haven't left," he stated, his voice a soft rumble. It wasn't an accusation, but a simple observation filled with a universe of unspoken hope. "The portfolio is still on the table," she replied, her gaze fixed on the restaurant. "A new name, a new city. A clean slate. It is everything you wanted," he agreed. "A life away from all of this. A life you deserve." He was offering her an exit, a final, honorable discharge from his world. It was the most selfless thing he had ever done, giving her the chance to walk away from him, to be free of the darkness that would always cling to his life. She finally turned from the window to face him. She looked at his face, at the faint scar near his eye, at the quiet strength in his expression. She thought of the fear she had felt, the terror, the chaos. But she also thought of the strange, exhilarating clarity she had found in the clock tower, the feeling of her mind shaping events, of being not a victim of circumstance, but a master of it. She thought of the man who saw her, truly saw her, when no one else had bothered to look. "The girl who wanted that life is gone," Zara said softly. "She died in a restaurant a long time ago. I don't know if I'm strong enough for your world." Minjun, he reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. His touch was warm, solid, an anchor in the shifting landscape of her future. "Then don't be in my world," he said, his voice earnest, vulnerable. "Just be in mine." Her choice was made. It wasn't about choosing a life of crime or violence. It wasn't about becoming a queen in his underworld kingdom. It was about choosing him. About choosing the complicated, dangerous, and profoundly real connection they had forged in the crucible of chaos. She squeezed his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "Okay," she whispered. "But just so you know, I have some ideas about how to redecorate this place." "It's a little severe." A genuine laugh escaped him, a sound so rare and warm it seemed to fill the entire cavernous room. He pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her as they both turned to look out at the city. It was no longer a cage or a prize. It was just a place. Their place. The skyline glittered before them, a kingdom of glass and steel, and from their perch high above it all, they were finally, truly home.